This is the Authority Company Podcast, conversations with leaders that are designing our future. Hola, I'm Joe Pardavila, and today's guest is Dr. Marie Morse, a neurologist and sleep specialist who helps patients and care teams communicate better. We're going to talk about her new book, Communication in Healthcare, Charting the Course to Better Outcomes with Trust, Respect, and Teamwork, which is a practical guide for patients, families, clinicians, and leaders. Dr. Marie Morse, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing awesome. How can I not be excited to be here today with you to be able to chat about some really important topics?
Awesome. I'm feeling awesome as well, Doc. And I want to start by talking about sort of like the personal stories that inspired the book. And I feel like, and you being a physician know this better than I do, that there are some diseases, afflictions, traumas that don't only affect one person, they affect the family. It's like when you hear someone say, like, someone in the family has cancer, the entire family essentially has cancer because their life is about to change. So a couple decades ago, my father was diagnosed with Huntington's disease. And if people don't know much about it, I mean, I compare very much to ALS, where essentially you become trapped in your body, and it affected the family. It affected me. It affected my mom. Selfishly, I was like, I don't know if I could even spend time with dad because this is not the dad I know. And for you, your mother battled MS. So tell me about that sort of like diagnosis. I mean, obviously it changed your mom got the brunt of it, but it also changes the people around him. What was that like for you?
Sure. So everything you just said definitely resonates with me so strongly, not only as a child of someone with a chronic disease, as a clinician who takes care of tons of children and families with chronic disease, but really as an advocate for being able to make transformative change in healthcare to be able to make it less lonely and scary and really just absolutely vulnerable. And so in my experience, what had even pushed me into going into healthcare was my mother's journey with multiple sclerosis. And what's interesting about it is as you are describing, I'm afraid to even be with my dad because this isn't the dad that I know. I had the opposite experience of that. My mom was diagnosed when I was only 5 years old. So of course I don't recall any of this. And
Right.
it was 6 months after she had given birth to my younger brother. And she was in a wheelchair because of the first flare that she had experienced. At the time of her experience, this was before there were any disease modifying agents. And so it really was, if you got diagnosed, you got some steroids. If you got better, great. And then you would follow with the neurologist. However, she had first gone through a journey of being thought that her symptoms were related to a postpartum depression. And then when finally diagnosed, was pretty much met with, well, you had a flare, you get steroids, if you get better, great. If not, there's really not much else we can do. This probably is your last kid, so you probably shouldn't have any more flares. What my mom perceived was the fact that there's really nothing else we can do for you. And so she, instead of continuing to follow long term with neurology, adopted a mindset of hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil, to the point where when she would go to her primary care for follow up and they would ask things like, what is your past medical history? She would say migraine and neglect even describing she had MS because she felt as though, why bother? There's nothing anyone can do for me. And so one of the things that was really detrimental for her is, although there were no disease modifying agents, within a few years, those did come to the market. So she went for 20 years without there being any type of intervention, as well as being a family who would witness, we're in Disney. And of course, mommy needs to sit down because she can't walk because of her foot drop. Of course, mommy's going to skip a meal because she can't really swallow that well. Or, yeah, mommy's just going through a period where she has slurred speech. And so our common became our normal, although it was far from normal. And so when I decided to go into medical school, I had said to my mom, don't embarrass me by not having a neurologist. I'm going to be a neurologist because I will never let a family walk this journey alone again.
Wow, that's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. And just out of curiosity, side note, sidebar, um, MS, I know the ways to handle it have changed because I remember I'm old enough to remember, like, if you were MS, you were it was almost like a literal cross to bear. Like there was really not much you can do. But you mentioned
Sure.
some of the therapeutics that come across. How tell me about like the night and day of it all in terms of like what it
Sure.
was for your mom and what it is like now.
Sure. So when you look at when my mom was diagnosed, which is almost 30 years ago, there were no treatments. The drugs that did come to the market were injectable treatments that were really two classes of drugs. When you look at the landscape currently, we have now over 30 different medications that are available. And as opposed to the medications that initially became available, which only treated one aspect of multiple sclerosis, which was our relapsing remitting class. And you had these other more severe classes called primary and secondary progressive. What we now see is we have medications available. So it's not just being able to treat one patient, it's being able to treat all of the patients and really being able to be transformative by decreasing the likelihood of you having more flares and preserving the brain that you have so that you can live your life more optimally, as well as not always having to stick yourself with a needle. We even see now oral therapies or infusions that can occur once every 6 months. So really not only improving the life from a disease perspective, but the quality of life and functionality. So not just surviving, but thriving.
Ah, love that. That's so great to hear. That's awesome. I mean, I'm sure your mom would have been like, geez, where was this 30 years ago? But I guess, it's listen, progress is progress. All right. So you kind of broke it down a little bit there about the communication aspect of it, and you've kind of made this your bag, along with being a physician, but the healthcare communication. And I work with a lot of doctors, know a lot of them, and I often joke with them is you doctors are so busy, you've become terrible communicators. When you
Sure.
go see a doctor, you don't see their face, you see their profile because they're busy typing into a machine. We all know, for folks not familiar with the healthcare industry, within the last decade, the EHR has been introduced where all the medical records are electronically filed. But because of that, doctors have to physically file it and do it in real time. And it makes these doctor visits not only sort of very transactional, but very cold because
Yeah.
of the sheer fact of the way they have to work and listen and get this all done within the 20 minutes they have with this patient because they got another one standing by. Why was communication? Obviously, your mother's story helped, but why was communication such a special like vertical that you felt like you needed to get into? Because you could write a book about anything, yeah, in your life as a physician, but why communication?
Sure. So, as I've gone through my journey, both through medical training as well as a clinician, I very rapidly have advanced my career to taking over divisions, developing residency programs, playing a very significant role in education. And no matter what my leadership position or even outside of a leadership position, I always have adopted some of the recommendations that my dad had given me when I was younger, which is in any relationship, there are three principles: trust, respect, communication. As a clinician and healthcare leader, I add on two other principles, which is best in class practice and teamwork. When you look at those five principles of trust, respect, communication, best in class care, and teamwork, the one that is the keystone is communication. Without that, everything else falters. So if I am unable to effectively, transparently communicate, there is no way I can establish a trust and respecting relationship. There's no way we're going to function as a high performing team. And there's absolutely zero chance that I'm going to deliver you the best in class care that is going to get you the best outcomes. When we're looking at the healthcare setting, it's not just the communication between the clinician and the patient that falters and fails repeatedly. It is a more global ecosystem that we see. And we see that we've created these independent silos of industry, pharmaceutical companies, et cetera, are trying to deliver message here. Healthcare insurances are delivering a message or creating barriers over here. Clinicians doing something and our schedulers doing something else. And then the administration telling us that what you're doing is still not enough. And so when you look at that, the person who continues to be the victim is the person trying to receive care, but also the clinicians who have invested their lives into being able to deliver high quality care are constantly having to fight the battle of how do I utilize my time because I'm not being valued for spending time in knowing the individual in front of me. And so one of the things that I feel is so incredibly important, in addition to those five principles, and my team hears me say this all the time, is be human first. If we constantly neglect the humanity that comes with having the privilege of creating those relationships, we will never be able to forge a path forward that is going to achieve those transformational changes that allow for people to live most optimally.
And one of the things I've noticed from speaking to doctors, and this is the thing they struggle with, is you talk about the five levels that you kind of go as a doctor and probably like your practitioners, but it's also that the front of house care. That's the one thing that most physicians really have no idea because, again, going back to the business, you have no idea what's happening at the front of the house, and
Sure.
that interaction. And as many of us know, most of the time you're going to spend in a physician's office is with the front of the house. You're going to spend
Yes.
very little time with physicians and practitioners. Um, how do you go about that with building teams, and maybe advice for other people when to have the front of the house match the back of the house?
Sure, sure. I even highlight this in my book and illustrating through a case vignette of a gentleman who is going to his oncologist for his first meeting around a new cancer diagnosis. And he arrives late because he was given the wrong directions. He then has an attitude from the front staff. His brain is going a million miles a minute. And so the implications of that are real and they're tangible. And sometimes they're ones that we can easily ignore because we say, well, they're not the doctor. And so the doctor is the only thing that matters. That's absolutely incorrect. The person in the seat receiving the information is what matters. And so for me, when I go again back to those 5 principles, those same 5 principles are held to that. So for instance, when we are working on team building, it is including my front of house. And they are put at the same level as even my lead epileptologist or lead clinicians because of the fact that they are equally important to being able to uphold the highest level of care. If we are allowing for people to perform subpar and accept less, then we are accepting less for ourselves as clinicians as well as for our patients. And so I really do look to them as giving me insights as to how can I make your job more rewarding? How do I make it more professionally satisfying? How do I elevate what your delivery is able to be? But also remind everyone that we're in this together as a team that have equal contribution to being able to have the most optimal outcomes.
Love it. That's great. That's great. And before we get to the book, I want to dig in one more thing. Another one of your specialties is sleep. And
Yes.
from my experience, sleep doctors have been the most stubborn of all physicians. And I know most physicians are very stubborn, and they have the right to be. But sleep physicians, the ones I knew from many, many years ago, were you have to sleep 10 hours. It's got to be 68 degrees in the room. You've got to sleep on your back, and all these hard and fast rules. And we all know life moves fast. We all can't get 10 hours a day. There's some flexibility in that world now, Doc. So first tell me about why sleep became one of your specialties, and how your industry has changed a bit over the years.
Sure. So sleep is definitely a young field. It only was first developed in the 1970s. And really, when you're looking at the field of sleep, it is one of these interesting specialties where I honestly think it's a mistake of characterizing as independent from other specialties because sleep is what I would call a homeostatic process, meaning your body must do it. And therefore, it has relevance across all of your organ systems. When you're talking about sleep, it is a neurologically derived process. And therefore, as a neurologist, I was constantly seeing individuals who were seeing me for a neurologic disorder, and they had sleep or circadian challenges. And so, very frequently, I would be told, oh, well, that is a comorbidity or a co occurring condition that they're experiencing. And one of the things I have constantly pushed back on and really have led in delivering in our field is saying it's not a comorbidity, it's part and parcel of what I do as a neurologist. And so, really taking the ownership of let's own our full 24 hours so that we can live most successfully, untap, be able to tap into that unlocked potential. And that had led me to going into the field of sleep medicine. Since being in sleep medicine, I agree with you. There is some historical dogma of that we need to have it exactly cookie cutter. That's absolutely incorrect. However, with that stated, there are some guardrails there and recognizing that there's over 70 different sleep wake or circadian disorders, it's important to also put that into the perspective of what are we seeing in society? Only a growing number of individuals who are compromising their sleep or circadian health in order to get more done in the day. And what we're seeing is the inverse occurring. We become less efficient, we become less healthy, we become more dissatisfied. And so being able to be a part of a movement to help in facilitating using those full 24 hours, optimizing your sleep and circadian health to be the best version of what you can be.
And it's become its own industry, as you know. I mean, as you said, in the 70s, there wasn't much. Now we have over the counter, we have prescription, we have companies that are built around. We have those. I'm not 100% sure sold on these, but the blue light blocking glasses, because we're staring at screens for too long, and then that affects our circadian. Well, how about that? The blue light thing. We're obviously all attached to our screens. Tell us give us the real. Don't give me like what do you call the clickbait thing that you'll see on X about sleep and blue light. What's your take on that?
So one of the things that we're seeing is that we've gone through a whole evolution around blue light and what is the actual impact of that. Part of the reason, the background as to why that became such a hype is because when we're looking at what is allowing for us to facilitate sleep, it's our own brain's production of a hormone called melatonin. You're probably familiar with it because most people are reaching for it over the counter to help them put themselves to sleep. However, when you're talking about what helps produce your brain's melatonin, it is the absence of blue light, which most typically is coming from your outside light where you're having your very bright white light type of light being delivered to your eye. Now, with that stated, we had first gone saying, okay, we need to have blue light blocking. This is the same reason as to when you're looking at your cell phone and all of a sudden it's like 6 o'clock and you're like, why can't I see what my screen is showing me? It's because it has a built in blue light filter. One of the things that we've identified with repeated research is demonstrating, yes, there may be some contribution from the blue light, but the bigger contributing factor to what can be disrupting to our ability to fall or stay asleep and have good quality sleep tends to be more so of the content of what we're doing. When you think about a lot of the things that we do, like that doomsday scrolling, it generally is designed in the same way as some other things that are highly addictive, like slot machines. And so the same as a slot machine is I pull, I pull, I pull, reward. That intermittent reward is very addicting. The same as I scroll, I scroll, I scroll. Look at that funny dog that's doing a dance in a hat. And it creates that same dopamine surge in my brain that is going to be weight promoting as well as drive me to stay doing that same activity. So I think what you're seeing in regards to a lot of what you've already described is this media sensationalization and clickbait is to drive people's attention. However, many times it's misdirected. How what I would say is the nice balance is we're seeing that this now is a multi-billion-dollar industry. And with that stated, I'm not saying about the physicians delivering healthcare. I'm talking about the consumer wearables. I'm talking about the online applications that are really looking at how can we better personalize and individualize that pathway. However, I would say the mistake that many are making is trying to do it alone. You should be partnering with a clinician, helping guiding to better personalize, making sure that you're getting the right treatment for the right disorders.
All right. Well, so I was a sucker because a friend of mine was telling me about this. And so, Doc, I'm going to show you. I did because I'm always staring at my screen with podcasts and work and also pleasure. But I got one of these. Now,
The blue light body practice.
besides me looking really cool with my blue light blocking glasses, is it going to do anything for me?
I would say it's about the limitation is going to be the coolness factor. So when being studied, most of those glasses actually are not even demonstrating to have the effectiveness of blocking the blue light. And if they do have the effectiveness, it generally is still mediating a very little component. Many a times we think we're going to block the blue light and that therefore as soon as I'm done with my computer, I'm going to be able to go to bed. But the activities we're doing, like finishing those emails, trying to tidy up that PowerPoint, making sure I'm doing that's still in my head and I'm still ruminating on that. And so I can block blue light all day. I can have you blindfolded doing that work. However, when you go to lay in bed, your brain is still going to be going, thinking about what else I need to do. And that is going to be the thing that prevents you from falling asleep.
It's Doc. It's so funny. We are so bad at nuance because everyone will lead you to believe as long as you're blocking the blue light, you're fine. But you just detailed it beautifully. Like, sure, but all this other crap you're doing is also going to affect your sleep. It's something
Yeah.
they don't mention those in the when you click when you click to
Yeah.
buy this glass,
No,
do they?
no, no. And what's fascinating is that the new emerging literature is actually talking about the use of red light and dynamic spectral lighting, meaning there is the Roy G. Biv, right? Red, orange, yellow, blue, green, indigo, violet. And so the blue light is what we're seeing in the beginning of the day when we first should be getting out of bed. And so we do utilize this as a part of clinical sleep medicine. If I have someone who has difficulty in waking up, I'm going to say to them, get something that's enhancing the amount of blue light. If you live in a place like Alaska where you're spending a lot of time in the dark, we're going to say get something that artificially enhances the blue light during the daytime. However, as the day is progressing, what our eyes should be seeing is a progression in the change of that Roy G. Biv. And so in the evening hours, we actually should be seeing more of a red light. And we have seen studies that have demonstrated that that can enhance your ability to fall asleep. And even in children, using a red light nightlight can facilitate a better sustaining of sleep and not as much nighttime arousals.
I love the idea of that, but in theory, but I'm just trying to think like a red light and a child. This is screaming like the next horror movie, like
Yes,
the red light in the bed.
it potentially could be concerning, but I think if you put it in a little crab or something else, you can make it a part of a thematic.
All right, good to know because I do have a 5-year-old nephew, so and he has trouble sleeping. So I will suggest that, and I'll tell them that don't worry, it's not going to look like a horror movie. All right, good to know. All right, well, I appreciate you indulging me. I want to dig into the book a little bit, and some people kind of like soft pedal when they start the book with a nice little anecdote. You come in hot, talking about a story about being misperceived during a critical moment.
Sure.
And when I have these conversations, Doctor, I try not to give too much away because really want people to enjoy the book. But tell me a little bit background behind that story and why you felt it was important to start the book with that.
Sure. So, as I've already detailed, the reason I went into medicine is because of my mom. A part of the reason I wrote the book was because of my mom's experience and our own personal family experience. And I really prioritized being an effective communicator, trying to lead with passion, with empathy. And even at times where I thought I was doing that, I sometimes found that I was falling flat on my face. And the illustration that you described is where there was a very difficult situation. And the result of it, at the time, I had no idea. It wasn't until later where I did establish a better rapport with the family, was that they absolutely hated me. And they hated me not necessarily because of what I did and what I delivered, but the information that I had to deliver. And so I was the unintended target of that hatred. And that was very, very meaningful and important to me because it really continued to shape who I wanted to be and how I wanted to show up in other people's lives. And so I wanted to also frame it out as I'm not perfect. I'm not the perfect communicator. One of the things that I love that my CEO, who, when he came on, his first presentation he gave was, I want us to be the best at getting better. And those words resonated with me so strongly because I think we fail when we think that we're going to get to our best. If you ever get to your best, that means everything else is downhill from there. And so, with that stated, I wanted to start with something that frames out this is what communication failure can look like, even when you're putting your best foot forward.
So you're going to make mistakes. We all are. What kind of advice do you give to someone in the healthcare field who had moments like that? How do you rebuild trust after that communication failure? I mean, obviously, apologies are usually in order, but like, what kind of applicable actions can people take when it comes to those communication failures?
Sure, sure. And this is a chapter in the book on service recovery because it is important. And what I would say is first own it. One of the things I think many people do is they lead with excuse as why it happened before identifying what is the root cause of it. And this is also part of the reason why I always go back to those 5 principles of trust, respect, communication, best in class care, and teamwork. Why? Because I like to lead with action, not necessarily emotion. When we lead with emotion, we end up misplacing intention, perception, and perspective. Our intention may be one thing, a person's perspective may be something else. The perception around everything is going to be mixed. And so, with that stated, it becomes really very important to first understand why did this breakdown of communication happen? And once you're able to identify that, you number one are able to acknowledge and potentially apologize. I apologize that what I stated was perceived as this. This is what my understanding is. What I would like to restate so that we can get back on a mutual level. Or it can potentially be not a blame. It wasn't me, it was John, right? It was there was a failure of how we communicated, which had a negative impact on you. And so when you're able to now identify that there was an action associated, it's not that you're a bad person or I'm a bad person, I'm intentionally trying to be harmful. It now creates the opportunity not only to resolve that, but to create guardrails to prevent it from happening again. And so now you've created a learning opportunity and a recovery opportunity rather than one that gets basically drowned down by emotional content that many times is not actually the source of what it was the occurrence.
Right. And and when you're breaking news, when it's bad news, and you could probably follow the steps that you take with better communication, it still is going to obviously affect the patient, but it's going to affect you somehow. How
Sure.
do you control it? Because there have been a million hours of television and movies that have seen these actors play doctors who deliver bad news and then affect them in an adverse way. Um,
Sure.
maybe you have to speak from personal perspective, or just when you're working with your colleagues. Like when you deliver that bad news and you walk out of that room,
Mhm.
are you the same person? Are you able to file it
Absolutely
away? Is
not.
it something that the therapist is going to deal with
Sure.
later? Talk about
Sure.
that.
Sure. So I think that's such an important question because there is this mistake that in medicine that we somehow have this superhuman ability to control our emotions and be unfeeling in periods of time where feeling is the most important and critical thing to experience. And when we do start to stow those away, they basically just rear their ugly heads in inappropriate settings. So, what I would say is a period of time that resonates or maybe best demonstrates this is that I run a division of child neurology. A part of when I'm on call is unfortunately to have to do brain death exams on children. And so, this is where I, as a neurologist, am going in, doing the examinations to say that there is no recovery of this brain. Your child, by definition, is dead. And that is not easy. And that is something, and it even makes me choked up to even discuss it because it's something that it does make me emotional. And there's many times where I will acknowledge to the family as I'm delivering this information, I'm sorry that I'm grieving your loss. And there has not been a time where I've said that where family hasn't thanked me for being human.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for that. And I'm curious, like, and I know obviously the patients and the families are the most affected, but you're still human, and like I said, you're
Oh,
feeling it. Ho- Is
100%.
is there like a scoreboard where almost like you get to a certain point when you rack up so many of these losses, for lack of a better word, where you're like, man, I need to stop. I need a break. Like, how do you handle when you get to that break? Because we all have heard very much since the pandemic about physician burnout, and I'm sure that will
100%.
help accelerate burnout. So how do you
Sure.
stop that from like just taking over your mind and body?
Sure. So, what I would say to you is not only for myself, but I also proactively do this with my medical students and residents. Is number one, I acknowledge that it is not appropriate to pretend like it doesn't bother. It is not appropriate to walk out of a room and just be like, well, we still have rounds to do. In that moment you need to grieve, you need to grieve. And so there have been times where I'm rounding and I have a team of residents and medical students, and I'll say to them, we need to take a break. I need my time. I need a moment. There's other times where I recognize the burden that others are experiencing. We unfortunately had a period of time where there were multiple non-accidental traumas that we were experiencing, so child abuse cases, and many of them did end up in death. And during that time, it was my same group of residents who were currently experiencing that. And so that same trauma was occurring again and again and again. And I could see how beaten down they looked physically, emotionally, cognitively. It was hard to continue showing up. Because of that, we now always do debriefs no matter what the cause of death is. Debrief so that there is an emotional coping, debrief so there's a cognitive understanding, debrief so that is reinforcing that we still are a team and we care for one another so that we can optimally care for the people who are looking to us for their support. By taking a different approach and trying to store it away, the result is only a callous checkpoint. I've done my points of inspection, and that never is resulting in anything that is building a relationship. It's just building a transaction.
Hmm. Wow. You talk about your students, and I'm curious because I remember I had a client who was a physician entrepreneur, and he made it his mission to help physicians, either have a side hustle or become entrepreneurs on the side. Um, and we joked about the fact that as physicians, when you go to medical school, you don't learn anything about business, about balancing books, running an office, none of that. And I said to this doctor, I'm like, why not? You go to school for like X number of years. You can't have like one class in there. And he said to me, we're too freaking busy. There's just literally zero time. And so what you're learning is mostly jargon. It's X's and O's. How do you, I don't want to say help students unlearn that stuff, but how do you help students kind of shake that off and not make everything so rigid and square peg into square hole?
Sure.
Tell me about that sort of process, and I'm sure you probably had to do that too after you left medical school in terms of like, oh wait, it's these aren't just like plastic cadavers and like lab. This is like real life. So
Sure.
how do you bring that to life for students?
Sure. So one of the first things I always say is I have yet to have someone come into my office with ABCD on their forehead for me to select the right multiple choice response. And although we are trained with a lot of clinical vignettes and multiple choice tests to say who is performing best, what I have found is that never reflects someone who has the best clinical acumen or the ability to relate. And so it is a very important point that you have made about the business of medicine, because many of us have been trained to think about that with the illies of that we should never think about medicine as a business because of the fact that we went into this to be selfless. However, by failing to look at a business component of medicine, what you end up doing is undervaluing yourself, because you now have left it to other people to tell you how you as a clinician fit as a value metric in the business. And so without having that type of knowledge set, you then are going to constantly be driven down to only being represented by how many what we call RVUs, which are basically the metrics used to say this is what your value unit is for each unit of work. And that doesn't account for the time that you're sitting and not billing on a phone or answering emails or read or educating students. And those are equally valuable. So one of the things that I would say to you is a part of when I'm trying to transform the communication and what the setting should be and why we need to think about both synchronous at the same time that I'm seeing you and asynchronous communication. You're not in front of me, but these are the things that I want you to do. And these are your red, yellow, greens that you need to think about to reach out to me or go to the ER, or those are great, stay on cruise control, is being able to understand how does that fit into the broader context of business. I alluded to earlier that healthcare has fallen apart into these silos of there's industry over here and they're bad, don't hang out with them. And the insurers, all they want are your money. And then the clinicians, they're hard worker, but you know what? They may also only want the money, the C-suite executive. And then again, the poor patient who we're only looking at them when they're in front of us in the clinic, but we're not looking at them when they're existing in the community. And so what we need to do is be able to understand how do you take all those and create the business that everyone's getting the ROI, the return on investment, by showing up and contributing in a manner that fits with the role that they have. And when you're able to now tell that story, you can make that fit any of those other settings that people are going, that makes sense. That is why we should communicate this way. That is why we should offer these asynchronous tools. That is why the health plan should approve this without needing a prior authorization. That is why we want industry at the table so that we can be a part of clinical trial design and what the patient reported outcomes are, and being able to facilitate healthcare changes that actually reflect the needs and desires of the people who are boots on the ground.
Wow. And then the book is not solely for doctors or healthcare professionals. You do give some communication advice for patients. What's one piece of advice for patients when it comes to either going to right before a doctor's visit or during the doctor's visit that you recommend for folks that they get the most out of their visit?
Sure. So I would say that one of the things that I allude to in the book, and so the book is written in a voice so that it does address the healthcare ecosystem. So the patient, the patient and their family and support, but also providers, C-suite executive nurses, you name it. Now, with that stated, there also are little QR codes that you can scan, and there's a bunch of different activities to do. The thing that I tell people that is probably the most valuable, and the reason why I say it's the most valuable is because one of the most commonly encountered things that I hear from patients in my role as an advocate is saying, how do I get my doctor to listen? How do I get them to pay attention to the things that I'm concerned about? In other words, how do I stop being invalidated in my own lived experience? And so many times you'll hear clinicians say, oh, you should keep a headache diary or you should keep a sleep diary. And I've moved away from that type of recommendation to saying, I want you to keep a symptom diary. And the reason I say that is by me telling you to keep a diary of a specific area, I now have invalidated or told you that anything else that is occurring in your life doesn't matter or doesn't pertain to how I can facilitate care for you. By being able to keep a symptom diary and understand what your lived experience is, we now together can look at what your pattern of experience is. It also empowers you as an individual to recognize things that are actionable that you can do without needing a clinician, without needing a medication. Many people, especially living with a chronic disease, feel as though they are held victim to relying on the healthcare ecosystem to drive at them living most successfully because we're not equipping people with the tools that they have in their own hands already. And so this now allows for you to not only have that information, it also serves for us as a baseline to build from. And we can build a progress map and being able to say, this is what success looks like, because it's never binary. It's not that you're healthy or unhealthy. It's that we are trying to be the best at getting better.
Sounds like your mom could have used that symptom diary just to describe by the way you described her earlier about like, yeah, I mean, I've got this thing called MS, but yeah, but here's I'm really here because about my foot. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it's see, she probably could have used that wise advice back then.
Yes, yes. Luckily, she's adopted it now, and by brutal force. No, I'm just kidding. And she really is doing quite well now, and she's probably one of my biggest cheerleaders that I'm very thankful for.
That's great. That's so cool. Lastly, so if say this book was a one of these magic books where like, it's a spell and all of a sudden if you read a passage from the book, the spell takes hold. If a doctor or a health group read this book and it magically were to transform because they read the book, what would that look like? Like
Yeah.
for a layperson, like, okay, I get the idea of the importance of communication. You've got some solid advice, but what would it actually do on the ground for folks in healthcare?
Yeah. So what my hope is that it leads to transformation that moves healthcare away from these episodic transactions of care to something that's more reflective of what the patient journey looks like. And so really being more of a continuous longitudinal model of care. So really building around what does the patient's lived experience look like versus what is it that we can offer. So instead of starting with us in the healthcare setting, what can we do once they get to us? What can we do to build for? What can we do to improve it once they're here? But more so represent how do we build utilizing consumer wearables, remote patient monitoring? How do we use applications? How do we create this continuous model that allows for a person to live the most empowered experience that they can have?
Ah, that's great. Good stuff. And doctor, generally I wrap up these conversations by taking folks behind the dedication of the book. But obviously, you dedicate the book to your mom. So I'm not gonna go there. So I'm gonna flip it. What does your mom think about the fact that, obviously what happened to her kind of set you on this path?
Yeah.
But how's your mom taking all this? The fact that you've chosen this career, but then wrote a book that was basically dedicated to her.
Yeah, I would say that both of my parents, it brings them to tears. They're very, very proud, and it really is something where she has been very appreciative of the fact that other people in my life, as the career that I've taken, have written her things or have specifically gave praise to her because of the outcome that I've been able to impact.
Oh, that's so awesome. That's so awesome. Her name is Dr. Marie Morse. The book, Communication in Healthcare, Charting the Course to Better Outcomes with Trust, Respect, and Teamwork. Dr. Morse, thanks so much for the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And that's going to do it for this episode. If you want to find out more information about Dr. Morse and our other amazing authors, go to theauthoritycompany.com.